There I was, standing in the marble hallway of Westfield Academy, holding a batch of homemade cookies for my grandson's class party. The same hallway where I had walked as a young mother 35 years ago, where I had celebrated my daughter Rebecca's achievements, where I had donated countless hours and thousands of dollars to build the very wing we were standing in. Rebecca looked at me with those cold eyes I had been seeing more frequently and said the words that would haunt me forever. "Don't come anymore, Mom. You're embarrassing us with your old-fashioned ways." Can you imagine being told by your own daughter that your presence is shameful? What would you do if the child you sacrificed everything for suddenly decided you were too much of a burden to be seen in public? I stood there in my carefully chosen navy dress, the same one I had worn to board meetings when I was running my consulting firm. The same hands that had signed million-dollar contracts were now trembling as they held those cookies. I said nothing. I simply turned around and walked to my car, but I already knew that by the next week, everything would change forever. My name is Sophia Kensington, and I'm 68 years old. For the past 15 years, since my husband passed away, I've been the family's quiet backbone. I sold my successful business consulting firm to help Rebecca through her divorce, to pay for little Michael's private school, to ensure they never lacked anything. I moved from my spacious home in the suburbs to a smaller apartment so I could be closer to them, available whenever they needed me. What Rebecca didn't know as she stood there dismissing me like an outdated piece of furniture was that I had just received a very interesting phone call that morning. The principal, Dr. Harrison, had called me personally. Not Rebecca. Not her new husband, Richard. Me. Mrs. Kensington, he had said in that respectful tone I hadn't heard in months. We need to discuss your grandson Michael's situation. There are some concerns about his academic performance, and more importantly, about some financial irregularities in his account that require immediate attention. You see, Rebecca had convinced me to set up an education fund for Michael 3 years ago. A substantial fund. She had insisted on managing it herself, claiming it would be easier for the family dynamics. I had transferred $450,000 to that account, trusting that my daughter would handle Michael's educational expenses responsibly. But Dr. Harrison's tone suggested something was very wrong. As I drove home that afternoon, Rebecca's words echoing in my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that the embarrassment she was so worried about wasn't about my age or my ways. It was about something much deeper, something that would soon come to light. I spent that evening in my small apartment, looking through old photo albums, pictures of Rebecca as a little girl, sitting on my lap as I worked on business proposals, pictures of her graduation, where she had thanked me in her speech for being the strongest woman I know, pictures of Michael's birth, when she had cried and said, "I want to be the kind of mother you were to me." The irony was suffocating. The same hands she now found embarrassing had built everything she currently enjoyed. The same mind she considered outdated had created the financial security that allowed her to live in that beautiful house in the exclusive neighborhood. But as I closed the last album, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not just hurt, not just disappointment. I felt the familiar stirring of the strategic mind that had once turned a small consulting practice into a multi-million-dollar operation. Rebecca had forgotten something crucial about me. She had forgotten that I wasn't just her mother. I was Sophia Kensington, the woman who had negotiated with CEOs, who had uncovered financial discrepancies in Fortune 500 companies, who had never lost a case of corporate fraud investigation. And tomorrow, I would start treating this family situation exactly like what it apparently was, a case that needed investigation. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. As I prepared my coffee, I made a mental note to call Dr. Harrison and schedule that meeting he had mentioned. But this time, I wouldn't be going as the embarrassing grandmother. I would be going as Sophia Kensington, financial consultant and fraud investigator. And something told me that by the end of that meeting, Rebecca would understand exactly who she had tried to dismiss. The next morning, I dressed differently. Not the soft cardigans and comfortable shoes Rebecca had grown accustomed to seeing me in. I chose my charcoal gray Armani suit, the one I used to wear to the most important board meetings, the one that commanded respect before I even opened my mouth. I pulled my silver hair back into the elegant chignon I had perfected during my corporate years and applied the red lipstick that had been my signature for decades. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the embarrassing old woman Rebecca wanted to hide. I saw the consultant who had saved 3 companies from bankruptcy and exposed embezzlement schemes worth millions. Dr. Harrison's office hadn't changed much since my corporate days. The same mahogany desk, the same leather chairs where I had once sat as a donor and board member. But this time, I wasn't there to write a check or volunteer for a fundraising committee. "Mrs. Kensington," Dr. Harrison said, standing as I entered. "Thank you for coming so promptly. Please, have a seat." I noticed he didn't offer me the informal chair near the coffee table where he usually met with parents. He gestured to the chair directly across from his desk, the position reserved for serious business discussions. "I'll be direct," he began, and I appreciated his straightforward approach. "Michael's tuition payments have been irregular for the past 6 months. We've received partial payments, late payments, and last month the check bounced entirely." My blood chilled, but I kept my expression neutral. "I'm sorry, Dr. Harrison, but that's impossible. I established a substantial education fund specifically for Michael's expenses. $450,000 should more than cover his education through high school and beyond." Dr. Harrison's eyebrows raised slightly. "Mrs. Kensington, according to our records, that fund shows a current balance of less than $30,000. The room went silent, except for the ticking of the antique clock on his desk. $420,000. Gone. "Furthermore," Dr. Harrison continued carefully, "we've had some concerns about Michael's emotional state. He's been telling his classmates that his family is struggling financially, that his grandmother can't afford to help anymore. The school counselor has noted that he seems anxious about money, which is unusual for a child his age. I felt that familiar sensation from my consulting days, the moment when a case shifted from simple bookkeeping errors to something much more sinister. Dr. Harrison, may I ask who has been communicating with the school about Michael's financial matters? Your daughter Rebecca and her husband Richard have been our primary contacts. They explained that you had reduced your involvement in Michael's education due to your advancing age and some memory issues." Memory issues. I almost laughed. The same mind they claimed was failing had just calculated exactly how much money had disappeared and in what time frame. "I see," I said calmly. "And these concerns about Michael's emotional state, when did they begin?" "About 4 months ago, coinciding with when the payment irregularities started. 4 months ago. Right around the time Rebecca had started making comments about my age, about how I needed to step back and let them handle things. Right around the time she had insisted I didn't need to attend family dinners every week because it was too much trouble for me. Dr. Harrison, I need to ask you a favor. Michael is my grandson, and his welfare is my primary concern. I'd like to review all financial communications regarding his account over the past year. As the original fund contributor, I believe I have that right." "Of course, Mrs. Kensington. I'll have our business office prepare those documents immediately." As I left the school that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The thrill of the hunt, the satisfaction of pieces falling into place, the anticipation of justice. But more than that, I felt heartbroken for Michael. That sweet 8-year-old boy was worrying about money, feeling insecure about his future, while his mother and stepfather were apparently living off his education fund. I drove directly to my bank, where I had done business for over 30 years. Margaret Chen, the branch manager, greeted me with genuine warmth. "Mrs. Kensington, how wonderful to see you. How can we help you today?" "Margaret, I need to review all transactions on the education fund I established for my grandson 3 years ago. Every withdrawal, every transfer, every detail." Her expression grew serious. "Of course. Let me pull those records immediately." 20 minutes later, I was staring at a financial trail that would have impressed even my most experienced forensic accountants. Regular withdrawals of $5,000 to $8,000 monthly. But here's what Rebecca didn't know about her old mother. I had insisted on receiving quarterly statements, even though I had given her access to the account. The withdrawals weren't going to Westfield Academy. They were going to luxury retailers, vacation resorts, and what appeared to be payments on a very expensive car loan. Margaret looked at the statements with me, her professional discretion evident, but her concern clear. "Mrs. Kensington, these spending patterns don't align with educational expenses." "No, they don't," I agreed quietly. "Margaret, I need to make some changes to this account. Immediately." That evening, I sat in my apartment with a cup of tea and my old business planner. I hadn't used it in 3 years, but muscle memory kicked in as I began creating what I used to call a strategic intervention plan. Rebecca and Richard thought they were dealing with a lonely, aging woman who was too embarrassed to question their decisions. They had calculated that my love for Michael would make me compliant, that my desire to remain part of the family would keep me quiet. They had miscalculated catastrophically. I opened my laptop and began typing an email to someone I hadn't contacted in years, James Morrison, the private investigator I had worked with during my corporate days. If Rebecca and Richard were stealing from Michael's education fund, I wanted to know what else they were hiding. But more importantly, I wanted to know exactly how deep this betrayal went before I decided how completely I was going to destroy their carefully constructed lies. As I hit send on that email, I realized something profound. For the first time in months, I didn't feel embarrassed or ashamed. I felt like myself again. And Rebecca was about to remember exactly who she had decided to cross. James Morrison looked exactly the same as he had 5 years ago when we last worked together. Still sharp-eyed, still wearing that understated gray suit that helped him blend into any environment. We met at the small cafe downtown where we used to discuss cases, away from corporate offices and curious ears. "Sophia," he said, standing as I approached, "you look like you're back in business." "In a way, I am," I replied, settling into the booth across from him. "But this time, it's personal." I laid out everything I had discovered in the past week. The missing $420,000, the lies to the school, the systematic isolation they had orchestrated to keep me away from asking questions. James listened without interruption, occasionally making notes in his small leather notebook. "Family financial fraud," he said finally. "It's more common than people think, especially when elderly relatives are involved. They assume you won't fight back. They assumed wrong." James smiled, the same expression he used to wear when we were about to expose a particularly arrogant corporate embezzler. "What do you want me to find?" "Everything. Their real financial situation, where my money actually went, what other lies they've been telling. And James, I want to know about Michael. If they're stealing his education money, what else are they doing that might be affecting him? Consider it done. I'll start with financial records, property holdings, credit reports. Should have preliminary information within 72 hours. As James left, I felt the familiar surge of energy that used to carry me through complex investigations. But this wasn't just about recovering money. This was about protecting my grandson and reclaiming the respect that my own daughter had systematically tried to strip away. I spent the afternoon at the local library, a place I hadn't visited since my consulting days when I needed to research corporate histories. The young librarian, probably Rebecca's age, looked surprised when I asked for access to the business database computers. "Are you sure you need the advanced search functions, ma'am?" she asked with that patronizing tone I had grown to hate. "Quite sure," I replied, settling into the chair with the confidence of someone who had spent decades navigating complex financial systems. What I discovered in the next 3 hours would have made my former clients proud of their old consultant. Richard Williams, Rebecca's husband of 2 years, had a business history that read like a warning manual for financial predators. 3 failed businesses in 5 years, 2 bankruptcies, multiple lawsuits from former business partners alleging fraud, and most interesting of all, a pattern of targeting women with substantial assets, particularly older women with family money. Rebecca wasn't his first wife. She was his third. Wife number 1 had lost her inheritance to his investment opportunities. Wife number 2 had been forced to sell her family home to cover his debts before divorcing him. My daughter hadn't married a charming entrepreneur, as she had told everyone. She had married a professional con artist who specialized in family financial fraud. But here's what Richard hadn't counted on. His new wife's mother wasn't just another elderly victim. She was someone who had spent 30 years exposing men exactly like him. I printed every document, every court filing, every bankruptcy record. By the time I left the library, I had enough evidence to show that Richard Williams was a career criminal who had found the perfect cover in my trusting, love-starved daughter. That evening, I called my old attorney, Patricia Hendricks. We had worked together on numerous corporate fraud cases, and she owed me several favors from the high-profile cases I had brought to her firm. "Sophia Kensington," she said warmly, when her secretary put me through. "I heard you had retired to enjoy your golden years. Retirement is overrated, Patricia. I need your help with a family matter that's become a legal matter." "Family fraud?" "Exactly. $420,000 missing from my grandson's education fund, managed by my daughter and her husband. I have reason to believe this is part of a larger pattern of financial abuse. Sophia, you know family law isn't my specialty, but financial fraud certainly is. Can you come in tomorrow morning? Bring everything you've found." After I hung up, I sat quietly in my apartment, looking at the family photos that lined my bookshelf. Pictures of Rebecca as a little girl, so bright and full of potential. Pictures of her college graduation, when she had been so proud to follow in my footsteps in business. When had she become someone who would steal from her own son? When had she become someone who would emotionally abuse her own mother to cover up theft? Then I remembered something that chilled me. 6 months ago, Rebecca had asked me to update my will. She had insisted on driving me to the attorney's office, sitting in on the meeting, making suggestions about simplifying my estate planning. I had been so touched by her sudden interest in spending time with me that I hadn't questioned why she was so concerned about my financial arrangements. Now I wondered what else I had signed that day, what other documents she had convinced me to update while I was just grateful for her attention. I reached for my phone and dialed Patricia's emergency line. "Patricia, it's Sophia again. I need to add something to our meeting tomorrow. I think they may have manipulated my estate planning documents as well." "Sophia," Patricia said, and I could hear the concern in her voice. "How long has this been going on?" "I'm beginning to think much longer than I realized." The next morning, I woke with a crystal-clear understanding of what I was facing. This wasn't just about money, though $420,000 was certainly significant. This wasn't just about being embarrassed at school events, though that humiliation still stung. This was about a systematic plan to isolate me, control my finances, and ultimately gain access to my entire estate. Rebecca and Richard hadn't just stolen from Michael's education fund. They had been preparing to steal everything. But as I dressed for my meeting with Patricia, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the absolute certainty that I was about to win. Because while they had been planning their theft, they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated exactly who they were stealing from. By the end of the week, Rebecca and Richard would discover that Sophia Kensington, financial fraud investigator, was about to treat them exactly like every other criminal she had ever exposed, with absolutely no mercy. Patricia's conference room hadn't changed since the days when we used to strategize against Fortune 500 executives who thought they were untouchable. The same mahogany table where we had spread evidence that sent 3 CEOs to prison. Today, that table was covered with documents that painted a devastating picture of my own family's betrayal. "Sophia," Patricia said, removing her reading glasses after reviewing the last bank statement, "this is one of the most sophisticated family fraud schemes I've seen. They didn't just steal money. They created an entire false narrative about your mental capacity to justify taking control of your finances." James Morrison arrived at 10 o'clock sharp, carrying a thick folder that he placed carefully on the table. "Ladies, what I found goes far beyond simple theft." He opened the folder and spread out photographs, financial records, and what appeared to be surveillance notes. Richard Williams isn't just a serial fraudster. He's part of a network that specifically targets wealthy elderly women. They call it inheritance acceleration. My blood went cold. Meaning they don't just steal your current assets. They position themselves to inherit everything when you die, and they're not always patient about waiting for natural causes. Patricia leaned forward. "James, are you suggesting—" "I'm suggesting that Mrs. Kensington's sudden memory problems and embarrassing behavior conveniently coincided with Richard encouraging her to update her will. I'm suggesting that the isolation from family events wasn't about shame. It was about preventing witnesses to her actual mental state." James pulled out a series of photographs. These were taken at the country club where Richard plays golf twice a week. He's been telling people there that Sophia has dementia, that Rebecca is heroically managing her deteriorating mother's finances out of family duty. The room went silent. I stared at the photographs of Richard, gesticulating dramatically to a group of well-dressed men, apparently spinning his lies about my mental condition to an audience who would never think to question such a tragic family story. "There's more," James continued. "I found the other wives. Richard's pattern is consistent. Marry a woman with family money, isolate her from financial control, spread rumors about her mental deterioration, and position himself as the concerned caregiver who sadly has to take over her affairs." "What happened to the other wives?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "Wife number 1 died in a car accident 6 months after signing her updated will. Wife number 2 is currently in a memory care facility, though her former friends insist she was completely lucid when Richard had her committed." Patricia's expression had turned deadly serious. "Sophia, we're not just looking at theft anymore. We're looking at a potential conspiracy that could be life-threatening." I felt something shift inside me, a cold clarity that I recognized from my most dangerous corporate investigations. Then we treat it exactly like what it is. A criminal conspiracy that needs to be completely exposed. "What do you want to do?" Patricia asked. "I want to set a trap. If Richard thinks he's dealing with a confused old woman who's losing her memory, let's give him exactly what he expects to see." James smiled. "I like where this is going." I stood and walked to the window, looking down at the busy street below. People hurrying to their jobs, trusting that their families loved them, believing that their children would protect them as they aged. How many of them were living with wolves in sheep's clothing? "Here's what we're going to do," I said, turning back to face them. "Richard and Rebecca think they've successfully isolated me and positioned themselves to inherit my estate. They think I'm too embarrassed and confused to fight back." I pulled out my phone and showed them Rebecca's latest text message. "Mom, we're having Michael's birthday party next week. Maybe it's better if you don't come. You seemed so tired last time, and we don't want you to feel overwhelmed." Michael's 9th birthday party. The party I had been planning for months, for the grandson whose education fund they had stolen. "They're not going to exclude me from Michael's birthday," I said quietly, "because I'm going to call Rebecca today and tell her exactly what they want to hear, that I'm confused about money, that I don't understand what's happening with Michael's school fund, and that I need their help managing my finances." Patricia looked concerned. "Sophia, that's dangerous. If you give them more access to your accounts—" "I'm not giving them access to anything real. James, I need you to help me set up some fake accounts with minimal funds. Accounts that will trace every transaction they make. A honey trap," James said admiringly. "Make them think they're getting access to your main assets while actually giving them access to monitored bait accounts." "Exactly. And while they're congratulating themselves on their latest theft, we'll be gathering evidence of ongoing fraud that will put them both in prison." I picked up my phone and dialed Rebecca's number. She answered on the second ring. "Mom, is everything okay?" "Rebecca, honey, I'm so confused," I said, letting my voice sound tired and uncertain. "The bank called about Michael's education account, and I don't understand what they're telling me. Could you and Richard help me figure out what's happening?" The relief in her voice was audible. "Of course, Mom. You don't need to worry about these complicated financial things anymore. Richard and I can handle everything." "That would be such a relief, dear. And about Michael's party, I've been feeling so scattered lately. Maybe you're right. Maybe I should stay home." "Mom, that's probably best. You seemed so tired at the last family gathering. We just want you to rest and not worry about anything." After I hung up, the three of us sat in silence for a moment. "How does it feel?" Patricia asked gently. "To hear your own daughter manipulating you like that?" "It feels like the moment I realized I wasn't just investigating fraud," I replied. "I was investigating the complete betrayal of everything I thought my family meant. But as painful as that realization was, it also crystallized my resolve. Rebecca and Richard had made a critical error. They thought they were manipulating a confused, lonely old woman. Instead, they had just volunteered to walk directly into a trap set by someone who had spent 3 decades catching criminals exactly like them. "James," I said, "I want surveillance on both of them starting tomorrow. Every meeting, every phone call, every transaction. Patricia, I want you to prepare criminal fraud charges and elder abuse charges. I want everything ready to file the moment we have sufficient evidence. And I want one more thing," I added, my voice deadly calm. "I want to make sure that when this is over, Michael never has to worry about money again, and he never has to wonder whether his family truly loves him. Because if there was one thing Rebecca and Richard should have remembered about me, It was this: I had never lost a case, and I wasn't about to start with my own family. The surveillance footage that James delivered 3 days later was more devastating than anything I had imagined. I sat in my apartment, watching my daughter and her husband celebrate what they believed was their successful manipulation of a helpless old woman. The video showed them at an upscale restaurant, toasting with champagne that cost more per bottle than most people spend on groceries in a month. Rebecca was wearing a new diamond bracelet that I estimated was worth at least $15,000. Richard was showing off photos on his phone of a luxury vacation they were planning to the Maldives. But what broke my heart wasn't the stolen money they were spending. It was hearing Rebecca's voice through the surveillance microphone. She actually believed that confused old woman act. Rebecca laughed, twirling the new bracelet around her wrist. Mom used to be so sharp, but she's really losing it. She didn't even question why Michael's school fund was empty. Your mother was easier to manipulate than I expected, Richard replied, cutting into his $100 steak. Most of them figure it out sooner. Most of them. The casual way he said it confirmed what James had suspected. I wasn't Richard's first victim. I was just his most recent target in a long line of elderly women he had systematically destroyed. The best part, Rebecca continued, is that she's so desperate to stay involved with Michael that she'll sign anything we put in front of her. The new will documents gave us power of attorney over all her assets if she's declared mentally incompetent. My hands trembled as I paused the video. Power of attorney documents I didn't remember signing. Mental incompetency proceedings they were apparently preparing to initiate. James, who was sitting beside me as we reviewed the evidence, spoke quietly. Sophia, there's more. Show her the medical records. He handed me a folder containing documents that made my blood run cold. Richard had been researching memory care facilities. Not just researching them, but specifically inquiring about their policies for patients whose families had financial power of attorney. But the most chilling document was a series of emails between Richard and a doctor I had never heard of, discussing age-related cognitive decline and the necessity of family intervention for patient safety. They're planning to have me declared mentally incompetent, I said, the words feeling surreal as I spoke them. Based on testimony from a doctor who has never examined you, using evidence of concerning behavior that Rebecca will provide, James confirmed. Once you're declared incompetent, they gain complete control of your estate. All of it. I thought about my estate, the apartment building I owned downtown, the investment portfolio that had grown steadily since I sold my consulting firm, the life insurance policies, the retirement accounts, everything I had spent 40 years building, everything I had planned to leave to Michael for his future. They weren't just stealing his education fund. They were stealing his entire inheritance. There's something else, James said carefully. About Michael. My heart stopped. What about Michael? They've been telling him that you don't want to see him anymore, that you're too sick to spend time with him, and that it makes you sad to be around children because it reminds you of how confused you're becoming. The cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. Not only were they stealing from Michael, but they were systematically destroying his relationship with me. They were making that sweet 8-year-old boy believe that his grandmother didn't love him anymore. Richard told Michael that you asked them not to bring him around because seeing him makes you agitated, James continued. The boy has been asking his teacher at school if there's something he did wrong to make his grandmother not want to see him. I felt something break inside my chest. The image of Michael blaming himself for my absence, believing that he had somehow caused his grandmother to stop loving him, was more than I could bear. But it also ignited something in me that I hadn't felt since my most ruthless corporate investigations. The absolute determination to destroy someone completely. James, I said, my voice deadly calm, I want you to accelerate everything. I want evidence of every crime they've committed, every lie they've told, every dollar they've stolen. Sophia, he said carefully, are you sure you want to move this fast? Sometimes it's better to let them commit more crimes so we have stronger evidence. No, I replied firmly. Every day we wait is another day that Michael believes his grandmother has abandoned him. Every day we wait is another day they're planning my destruction. I stood up and walked to my desk, pulling out the legal documents Patricia had prepared. It's time for phase 2 of our plan. I picked up my phone and dialed Rebecca's number. Mom, she answered, and I could hear the false concern in her voice that I now recognized as completely calculated. "Rebecca, dear, I've been thinking about what you and Richard said about helping me with my finances. I'm so confused about everything, and I think you're right. I need help managing my money." "Oh, Mom, that's such a wise decision. Richard has so much experience with financial planning." Financial planning. What a beautiful euphemism for systematic theft. "I was wondering if you could come over tomorrow afternoon. I have some documents I need help understanding, and I'd like Richard to look at my investment accounts. I think I need to simplify everything." "Of course, Mom. We'll be there at 2 o'clock. And Mom? Don't worry about anything anymore. We're going to take care of everything." As I hung up the phone, I realized that tomorrow afternoon, Rebecca and Richard would walk into my apartment expecting to find a confused, grateful old woman ready to hand over control of her life. Instead, they would find Sophia Kensington, armed with evidence of their crimes and ready to destroy them as completely as they had planned to destroy me. But first, I had one more phone call to make. "Dr. Harrison, this is Sophia Kensington. I wonder if you could help me with something. I'd like to surprise my grandson Michael with something special. Could you arrange for him to come to my apartment after school tomorrow? I think it's time he learned the truth about why his grandmother hasn't been around lately. Because if Rebecca and Richard thought they could turn my grandson against me, they were about to discover just how wrong they were. And tomorrow, when the police arrive to arrest them for elder fraud, theft, and conspiracy, Michael would be safely in my arms, finally understanding that his grandmother had never stopped loving him. Not for a single day. The morning of the confrontation, I prepared my apartment like I used to prepare for the most crucial board meetings of my career. Every document organized, every piece of evidence strategically placed, every detail planned to perfection. Patricia arrived at 11 o'clock, carrying a briefcase that contained enough legal firepower to destroy Richard and Rebecca's lives completely. Behind her came Detective Maria Santos, a financial crimes specialist who had worked with me on corporate cases years ago. "Sophia," Detective Santos said, embracing me warmly. When Patricia called and explained what was happening, I couldn't believe it. "I remember how you helped us nail that pension fund embezzlement ring. Now someone's trying to do the same thing to you?" "The difference is," I replied, "this time it's personal." James arrived with the final surveillance equipment, tiny cameras that would record everything Rebecca and Richard said and did. "They think they're coming to take advantage of a confused old woman," he said, testing the audio levels. "They have no idea they're walking into a documentary of their own crimes." At 1:30, I sent Patricia and Detective Santos to wait in the apartment next door, which my neighbor Mrs. Chen had graciously allowed us to use. James positioned himself across the street with a clear view of my building's entrance. At exactly 2 o'clock, Rebecca and Richard arrived. I watched through my window as they walked up to my building, Richard carrying a briefcase that undoubtedly contained more documents for me to sign away my rights. When I opened the door, Rebecca immediately began her performance. "Mom, you look tired. Are you feeling okay?" she asked with that false concern I now recognized as manipulation. "I'm fine, dear. Just a little overwhelmed by all these financial things I don't understand." Richard stepped forward with his most charming smile. "Mrs. Kensington, don't worry about anything. We're here to help simplify your life." They settled into my living room, Rebecca perching on the edge of the couch like she was visiting a fragile invalid, Richard spreading his documents across my coffee table with practiced efficiency. "Now, Mom," Rebecca began, "we've found some wonderful solutions for your financial confusion. Richard has identified some investment opportunities that will provide you with steady income while taking all the management burden off your shoulders." "That sounds wonderful," I said, playing my role perfectly. "I've been so worried about making mistakes." Richard opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. "These documents will transfer your investment accounts to a managed portfolio that Rebecca and I will oversee. It's much simpler for someone in your situation. My situation." The condescension in his voice was breathtaking. "And this document," he continued, sliding another paper toward me, "gives us power of attorney to handle all your financial affairs if you become unable to manage them yourself." "When might that happen?" I asked innocently. Rebecca and Richard exchanged a quick glance that the hidden cameras captured perfectly. "Well, Mom," Rebecca said carefully, "we've noticed that you've been having some memory issues. Sometimes it's better to have these protections in place before they're needed. What kind of memory issues? I pressed. You've seemed confused about money, about family events. Remember how you got lost trying to find Michael's school last month? I had never gotten lost going to Michael's school. I had been going there for 3 years, but this was clearly part of their prepared narrative to establish my mental incompetence. Oh yes, I said sadly. I suppose I have been confused lately. Richard leaned forward, sensing victory. The important thing is that you're recognizing the problem and letting us help. Many people in your situation resist giving up control, but you're being very wise. People in my situation, elderly people he had systematically destroyed. Richard, I said quietly, before I sign anything, could you help me understand something? I'm confused about Michael's education fund. The school says there's almost no money left, but I thought I had put aside plenty for his future. For just a moment, Richard's mask slipped. I saw a flash of panic in his eyes before he recovered his composure. Mrs. Kensington, that's exactly the kind of financial confusion we're talking about. The education fund is fine. Sometimes schools make administrative errors. But Dr. Harrison showed me the statements. $420,000 is missing. Rebecca jumped in quickly. Mom, you're misremembering the amount. You never put that much money in Michael's fund. They were both lying to my face, denying the theft, even as they sat in my living room trying to steal more. Maybe you're right, I said, reaching for the pen to sign their documents. I suppose I should trust you both to handle these things. As my hand moved toward the paper, Richard's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and smiled. Actually, Mrs. Kensington, there's one more thing we should discuss. Rebecca and I have been talking to a doctor about some treatment options for your memory issues. Treatment options? There's a lovely facility about an hour from here, Rebecca said. It's specifically designed for people with age-related cognitive decline. You'd have your own room, professional care, and we could visit regularly. A memory care facility. They were planning to have me committed. It sounds expensive, I said. Don't worry about the cost, Richard assured me. Your insurance and assets will cover everything. We'll make sure you're taken care of. My assets. They were planning to steal my entire estate and use it to pay for imprisoning me in a facility for people with dementia. That's very thoughtful of you both, I said. But before we discuss my future care, there's someone I'd like you to meet. I stood up and walked to my front door. You can come in now, I called. Detective Santos entered first, followed by Patricia, followed by James with his camera equipment. The color drained from both Rebecca's and Richard's faces. Rebecca Williams and Richard Williams, Detective Santos said, showing her badge. You're both under arrest for elder financial abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, theft of funds from a minor's education account, and conspiracy to file false mental competency proceedings. Richard jumped to his feet. This is insane. We were just trying to help her. Help me? I said, my voice no longer frail or confused. Help me by stealing $420,000 from my grandson's education fund? Help me by planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so you could steal my entire estate? Rebecca was staring at me in shock. Mom, what's happening? You said you needed our help. What's happening, I replied calmly, is that you both made a critical error. You assumed that Sophia Kensington, financial fraud investigator, had somehow become a helpless victim. I walked over to the coffee table and picked up the documents they had brought. Power of attorney papers, investment transfer forms, mental competency evaluations from a doctor I've never met. Did you really think I wouldn't recognize a systematic financial fraud scheme when I saw one? As Detective Santos read them their rights, Richard looked at me with pure hatred. You're a vindictive old woman who's going to destroy her own family. No, I replied quietly. I'm a grandmother who's going to protect her grandson from the people who stole his future and tried to convince him that his grandmother didn't love him. Because at that very moment, Dr. Harrison was bringing Michael to my apartment, where that sweet 8-year-old boy would finally learn the truth about why his grandmother had been absent from his life, and where he would discover that his education fund would not only be restored, but substantially increased. Rebecca and Richard had wanted to steal everything from me. Instead, they had just lost everything themselves. As the police car carrying Rebecca and Richard disappeared down the street, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Complete clarity. But there was no time to savor the moment. Michael would arrive within the hour, and I needed to prepare for the most important conversation of my life. Patricia was already on her phone with the district attorney's office. Yes, we have video evidence of them admitting to the theft. Yes, we have documentation of the planned commitment proceedings. This is going to be a very strong case. Detective Santos was reviewing the surveillance footage on James's laptop. Sophia, this is some of the best evidence I've ever seen in an elder fraud case. They documented their own crimes. But my focus was entirely on the small figure I could see walking up the sidewalk with Dr. Harrison. Michael looked smaller than I remembered. His shoulders hunched in a way that broke my heart. 8 years old, and already carrying the weight of believing his grandmother had abandoned him. "Everyone," I said quietly, "I need a few minutes alone with my grandson." The room cleared immediately. These professionals who had just helped me expose a criminal conspiracy understood that the most important battle was about to begin. I opened the door before Michael and Dr. Harrison could knock. "Grandma Sophia?" Michael said uncertainly, looking up at me with those beautiful dark eyes that reminded me so much of Rebecca as a child. "Hello, my darling boy," I said, kneeling down to his level. "I've missed you so much." Dr. Harrison spoke softly. "Michael, your grandmother asked me to bring you here because she has some important things to tell you." Michael nodded but didn't move closer to me. The distance between us felt like a canyon. "Michael," I began carefully, "do you remember how we used to bake cookies together every Sunday? And how I taught you to play chess?" "Yes," he whispered. "Do you remember how I used to tell you that no matter what happened, your Grandma Sophia would always love you?" His lower lip trembled. "But Mom said you didn't want to see me anymore because I made you sad." The cruelty of what they had done to this innocent child hit me again. "Michael, sweetheart, look at me." He raised his eyes to meet mine. "Your mother lied to you. I have wanted to see you every single day. There has not been one moment when you made me sad. You are the most important person in my entire world. Then why didn't you come to my baseball games? Why didn't you come to my school play?" I took a deep breath. This was the moment when I had to decide how much truth an 8-year-old could handle. "Michael, your mother and Richard told me not to come. They said I was too old and that I would embarrass you. But I should have come anyway. I should have fought harder to see you. They said you were sick and that seeing me made you confused. I'm not sick, sweetheart. I'm not confused. I'm your Grandma Sophia, and I'm exactly the same person I've always been." Michael studied my face for a long moment. Then suddenly, he threw his arms around my neck. "I missed you so much, Grandma. I thought you didn't love me anymore." As I held my grandson, feeling his small body shake with relief, I made a silent promise. Never again would anyone use him as a weapon against me. Never again would anyone convince him that he was unloved. After several minutes, Michael pulled back and looked at me seriously. "Grandma, why did Mom and Richard lie? How do you explain to an 8-year-old that his mother and stepfather are criminals who stole his education money and tried to destroy his relationship with his grandmother?" Sometimes adults make very bad choices, Michael. Your mother and Richard took money that belonged to you, money for your school and your future. They also tried to keep us apart because they were afraid I would find out what they had done. They took my money? Yes. But Michael, I want you to understand something very important. That money is going to be returned, and much more besides. You're never going to have to worry about school or college or anything else. I'm going to make sure of that. Are Mom and Richard in trouble? Yes, they are. They're going to have to face consequences for what they did. Michael was quiet for a moment, processing information that was far too complex for a child his age. "Grandma," he finally said, "can I come live with you?" The question broke my heart and filled it with hope at the same time. "We'll have to see what the courts decide, sweetheart. But no matter where you live, I'm going to be part of your life every single day from now on." Dr. Harrison, who had been watching quietly from the doorway, stepped forward. "Michael, your grandmother and I have been talking about some changes at school, too." "What kind of changes?" I smiled at my grandson. "Well, it turns out that your Grandma Sophia is going to be much more involved at Westfield Academy from now on. In fact, I'm going to be joining the board of directors." Michael's eyes widened. "Really? Really? And I'm also going to be establishing a new scholarship fund in your name, the Michael Kensington Fund for students who need help with their education." What I didn't tell Michael was that I had already spoken with my financial advisor that morning. Half of my estate would now be placed in an irrevocable trust for his education and future, managed by independent trustees who could never be manipulated or corrupted. The other half would fund the scholarship program that would help dozens of other children receive the education that Rebecca and Richard had tried to steal from him. Patricia knocked softly on the door. "Sophia, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there are some developments you need to know about." I looked at Michael. "Sweetheart, can you go with Dr. Harrison to get some cookies from the kitchen? I need to talk to my friend for just a minute." After they left, Patricia's expression grew serious. "The district attorney wants to move quickly on this case. Rebecca and Richard's bail hearing is tomorrow morning." "Good. But Sophia, there's something else. Richard's attorney is claiming that you orchestrated this entire situation to frame them. He's saying you're a vindictive old woman who's using your wealth and connections to destroy your own family." I felt a familiar surge of the strategic mind that had won every corporate battle I had ever fought. "Let him try that defense," I said calmly. "We have hours of surveillance footage of them admitting to their crimes. We have bank records showing $420,000 stolen from Michael's education fund. We have medical records showing Richard's attempts to have me committed for dementia that I don't have. Most importantly," I continued, "we have the testimony of an 8-year-old boy who will tell any judge exactly how his mother and stepfather convinced him that his grandmother didn't love him anymore." Patricia smiled. "You're right. Richard's attorney is going to walk into a courtroom thinking he's defending clients who were trying to help an elderly relative. Instead, he's going to discover he's defending systematic elder abuse and child emotional abuse." As Patricia left, I returned to the kitchen where Michael was helping Dr. Harrison arrange cookies on a plate. "Grandma," Michael said, "can we play chess like we used to?" "Every Sunday from now on," I promised. "And can we bake cookies?" "Every Sunday." "And will you come to my baseball games?" "I'll be in the front row." As we settled down with the chessboard that had been gathering dust for months, Michael looked up at me with a seriousness beyond his years. "Grandma, are you really okay? You're not sick or confused?" "Michael, I am sharper, stronger, and more determined than I have ever been in my life." And as I watched my grandson smile for the first time in months, I realized that Rebecca and Richard had accomplished something they never intended. They had reminded Sophia Kensington exactly who she was. And now everyone else was about to remember too. 3 days after the arrests, James Morrison's investigation had uncovered something that made our case look small by comparison. I sat in Patricia's office, staring at documents that revealed the true scope of Richard Williams's criminal enterprise. "Sophia," James said, spreading photographs across the conference table, "Richard wasn't just targeting you. He's been running this scheme for over 10 years, across 3 states. The photographs showed Richard with different women, all between 60 and 75 years old, all wealthy widows who had trusted him with their financial security. What I saw in those images made my blood run cold. This woman," James pointed to a photograph of a distinguished-looking lady with silver hair, "is Margaret Foster. She died in a car accident 8 months after marrying Richard and updating her will. The police report said she seemed confused and disoriented when she left the house that night. This woman," he indicated another photo, "is Helen Chen. She's currently in a memory care facility, declared mentally incompetent 6 months after Richard gained power of attorney over her finances. Her estate was worth $2.3 million. Patricia looked up from the legal documents she was reviewing. "James, are you suggesting that Richard has been systematically targeting elderly women for murder and forced commitment?" "I'm suggesting that Richard Williams is part of an organized criminal network that specializes in what they call inheritance acceleration. They don't just steal from their victims, they eliminate them." The room went silent as the implications sank in. I thought about how close I had come to being another photograph in James's collection. Another wealthy widow who had mysteriously developed memory problems and conveniently died or disappeared after updating her will. "There's more," James continued. "I've been in contact with investigators in Arizona and Florida who have been tracking similar cases. We think this network has stolen over $15 million in the past 5 years." My phone rang, interrupting the meeting. It was Detective Santos. "Sophia, I need you to get down to the station immediately. Richard Williams wants to make a deal." 30 minutes later, I was sitting in a police station conference room, facing the man who had planned to destroy my life and steal my grandson's future. Richard looked different now. The charming smile was gone, replaced by the desperate expression of a cornered criminal. His attorney, a nervous young man who clearly hadn't expected to be defending someone caught on video confessing to multiple felonies, fidgeted with his briefcase. "Mrs. Kensington," Richard began, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Really?" I replied calmly. "What part was misunderstood? The part where you stole $420,000 from my grandson's education fund? Or the part where you planned to have me declared mentally incompetent so you could steal my entire estate?" Richard's attorney cleared his throat. "My client is prepared to offer full restitution of the education fund in exchange for reduced charges." "Full restitution?" Detective Santos laughed. "Your client stole $420,000. That's grand theft. He also committed elder abuse, conspiracy, and fraud. This isn't a civil dispute where we negotiate settlements. Furthermore," Patricia added, opening her briefcase, "we now have evidence that Mr. Williams has committed these same crimes against at least 6 other elderly women across 3 states. 3 of those women are dead, and 2 others have been forcibly committed to memory care facilities." The color drained from Richard's face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Really?" I said, pulling out the photographs James had gathered. "You don't know Margaret Foster? Helen Chen? Dorothy Martinez? Shall I continue?" Richard stared at the photographs, his hands trembling slightly. "Here's what's going to happen," Detective Santos said. "Mr. Williams, you're going to tell us everything about your network. Every victim, every crime, every person involved. In exchange, we'll recommend that you serve your inevitable prison sentence in protective custody instead of general population. And if you don't cooperate," Patricia added, "we'll make sure that every prison in the federal system knows exactly what you did to elderly women and children." Richard's attorney whispered frantically in his ear for several minutes. Finally, Richard looked up with the expression of a man who knew his game was over. "I want immunity for my testimony against the others." "No immunity," Detective Santos replied immediately. "Reduced charges in exchange for complete cooperation. Take it or leave it." Richard sat silently for a long moment, staring at the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "There are 12 of us. We call ourselves family advisors. We specialize in helping wealthy elderly women simplify their lives." Over the next 3 hours, Richard laid out a criminal network that was more sophisticated and more brutal than any of us had imagined. They had profiles of wealthy widows in retirement communities across the country. They had forged relationships with corrupt doctors who would provide false dementia diagnoses. They had connections with unscrupulous attorneys who would handle the legal paperwork for forced commitments and estate transfers. Most chilling of all, they had a systematic method for eliminating victims who became suspicious or tried to fight back. "The car accidents," Detective Santos pressed. "How many weren't accidents?" Richard's attorney tried to stop him from answering, but Richard was beyond caring about legal strategy now. 6, he whispered. 6 car accidents, 2 heart attacks, 1 fall down the stairs. 9 elderly women murdered for their money. 9 families destroyed by greed and cruelty. As the interrogation continued, I thought about Michael, safely at home with Mrs. Chen while I dealt with the aftermath of our family's destruction. I thought about all the other grandchildren who would never see their grandmothers again because of Richard's network. But I also thought about justice, not just for me, but for Margaret Foster and Helen Chen and Dorothy Martinez and all the other women whose lives had been stolen by these predators. When the interrogation finally ended, Detective Santos walked me to my car. "Sophia," she said, "what you did was incredibly brave. Most victims of elder fraud never fight back. They're too ashamed, too isolated, too convinced that they really are losing their minds." "I had advantages that other victims didn't have," I replied. "I had the financial resources to hire investigators and attorneys. I had the professional experience to recognize fraud when I saw it. Most importantly, I had Michael to fight for." "What you had," Detective Santos corrected, "was the courage to fight back when everyone expected you to be a victim." As I drove home, I realized that this case was about more than recovering stolen money or protecting my grandson. It was about exposing a predatory system that targeted the most vulnerable members of our society. Rebecca and Richard had thought they were stealing from one confused old woman. Instead, they had just brought down a criminal network that had terrorized elderly women across 3 states. And tomorrow, when the news broke, every family advisor and inheritance accelerator in the country would discover that Sophia Kensington was not someone they wanted to cross. Because I wasn't finished with them yet. Not even close. The morning of Rebecca's bail hearing, I dressed in my most powerful suit. Not for intimidation, but for respect. Today, I would face my daughter in court for the first time since her arrest, and I wanted to look like the woman I had always been, someone who commanded respect, not pity. Michael sat beside me in the courthouse waiting area, his small hand in mine. The family services coordinator had arranged for him to stay with me temporarily while the court sorted out custody arrangements. Rebecca's parental rights were under review, and Richard, facing federal charges, would likely spend the next 20 years in prison. "Grandma," Michael whispered, "is Mom going to be angry with me for staying with you?" "Michael," I said gently, "your mother made choices that hurt you and hurt me. You didn't do anything wrong. You never did anything wrong." Patricia approached us with a grim expression. "Sophia, Rebecca's attorney is going to argue that you manipulated this entire situation to gain custody of Michael. They're claiming you set up Richard and Rebecca because you disapproved of Rebecca's marriage." "Let them try that argument," I replied calmly. "We have video evidence of them confessing to theft and conspiracy. We have bank records showing $420,000 stolen from Michael's education fund. Most importantly, we have Richard's confession about the entire criminal network." The courtroom doors opened, and I saw Rebecca for the first time since her arrest. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the orange jumpsuit and the weight of her crimes. When our eyes met across the courtroom, I saw something I hadn't expected. Shame. Good. She should be ashamed. The judge, the Honorable Margaret Williams, was a woman in her 70s who had built her career on protecting vulnerable citizens from exploitation. She reviewed the case files with the thoroughness of someone who understood exactly what was at stake. "Counselor," Judge Williams addressed Rebecca's attorney, "your client is charged with elder financial abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, theft from a minor's educational fund, and conspiracy to file false mental competency proceedings. The prosecution has provided substantial evidence including video confessions and financial records. What argument are you making for bail?" Rebecca's attorney, a young man who clearly wished he was anywhere else, stood nervously. "Your Honor, my client is a mother with no prior criminal record who was manipulated by her husband into participating in these activities. She poses no flight risk and should be released on her own recognizance." Judge Williams looked skeptical. "Counselor, the evidence suggests that your client actively participated in isolating her elderly mother from family events, spreading false information about her mother's mental condition, and emotionally abusing her 8-year-old son by convincing him that his grandmother no longer loved him. This doesn't sound like someone who was merely manipulated." The prosecutor, District Attorney Rachel Morrison, stood to present our case. "Your Honor, Rebecca Williams wasn't just manipulated by her husband. She was an active participant in a sophisticated fraud scheme that targeted vulnerable elderly citizens. The surveillance evidence shows her celebrating the theft of her son's education fund and planning to have her mother forcibly committed to a memory care facility." Judge Williams turned to look directly at Rebecca. "Ms. Williams, do you have anything to say before I make my decision on bail?" Rebecca stood slowly, her hands shaking. For a moment, I thought she might apologize, might show some remorse for what she had done to Michael and to me. Instead, she turned and looked directly at me with an expression of pure hatred. "Your Honor," she said, her voice stronger than I expected, "my mother has always been a controlling, manipulative woman who used her money to control our family. When I finally found happiness with Richard, she couldn't stand that I didn't need her anymore. She set this entire trap to destroy my marriage and take my son away from me." The courtroom was silent. Even her own attorney looked shocked by her statement. "She's not the victim here," Rebecca continued, her voice rising. "She's a vindictive old woman who's using her wealth and connections to frame her own family." Judge Williams studied Rebecca for a long moment. "Ms. Williams, are you claiming that the $420,000 that disappeared from your son's education fund was not stolen?" We used some of that money for family expenses. Michael benefited from those expenses. Luxury vacations and designer jewelry benefited your 8-year-old son? Rebecca's attorney tried to interrupt, but she kept talking. My mother never cared about Michael. She only cared about controlling us with her money. I felt Michael's hand tighten in mine. My grandson was hearing his mother publicly deny that his grandmother loved him, even as the evidence of her crimes was laid out in court. Judge Williams' expression grew cold. Ms. Williams, I've reviewed the evidence in this case extensively. The surveillance footage shows you and your husband celebrating the theft of your son's educational funds while planning to have your mother declared mentally incompetent. The bank records show systematic theft over a period of 18 months. Most disturbing to this court, the evidence shows that you deliberately damaged the relationship between your son and his grandmother as part of your scheme. She paused, looking at the documents before her. Bail is denied. Ms. Williams, you will remain in custody pending trial. Furthermore, I'm ordering an immediate review of your parental rights and granting temporary custody of Michael to his grandmother, Sophia Kensington. Rebecca's face went white. You can't do this. He's my son. Ms. Williams, Judge Williams said firmly, you stole your son's educational future and convinced him that his grandmother didn't love him. You forfeited your right to claim maternal concern when you chose theft and emotional abuse over your child's welfare. As the bailiffs led Rebecca away, she turned and shouted at me one final time. This isn't over, Mother. You think you've won, but you've destroyed our family. No, Rebecca, I said quietly, though I doubt she heard me over her own shouting. You destroyed our family. I'm rebuilding it. After the hearing, Patricia, Michael, and I sat in a small cafe near the courthouse. Michael was unusually quiet, picking at his sandwich while processing what he had witnessed. Grandma, he finally said, why did Mom say you don't love me? She sounded like she believed it. I knelt down beside his chair so we were at eye level. Michael, sometimes when people do terrible things, they have to convince themselves that other people are the real villains. Your mother stole money that belonged to you, and she tried to keep us apart. To make herself feel better about that, she had to believe that I was the bad person in this situation. But you're not bad. No, sweetheart, I'm not bad. And neither are you. We're just the people who got hurt by someone else's bad choices. Michael nodded solemnly. Grandma, when they put Mom in jail, is it because of what I told the police about her saying you didn't want to see me? My heart broke a little. This 8-year-old boy was worried that he was responsible for his mother's imprisonment. Michael, your mother is in jail because she stole money and lied to courts and hurt people. Not because you told the truth about what she said to you. You didn't do anything wrong by telling the truth. That evening, as I tucked Michael into the guest bedroom of my apartment, he looked up at me with those serious eyes. Grandma, are you going to keep me forever? Michael, I'm going to love you and take care of you for as long as you need me to, whether that's forever or just until we figure out what's best for you. I want to stay with you forever. Then we'll work on making that happen. As I turned off his light, Michael's voice came softly from the darkness. Grandma, I'm glad you're not really sick or confused. So am I, sweetheart. So am I. The next morning would bring new challenges. Rebecca's trial, Richard's sentencing, the ongoing federal investigation into the criminal network. But tonight, for the first time in months, Michael and I were both exactly where we belonged. And Rebecca's final words in the courtroom had been right about one thing. This wasn't over, but not in the way she thought. 6 weeks later, the day of Rebecca's trial arrived with the kind of crisp autumn morning that reminded me of new beginnings. I had spent the previous evening helping Michael with his homework at the kitchen table, the same table where I used to help Rebecca with her studies 30 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. The federal courthouse was packed with media. Richard's confession had exposed what prosecutors were calling the largest elder fraud network in American history. Representatives from 12 other families whose loved ones had been victimized were present, including Helen Chen's daughter, who had flown in from California to finally learn what had really happened to her mother. Michael wasn't in court today. Dr. Harrison had arranged for him to spend the day at school, maintaining some normalcy while his mother faced justice for her crimes. But before I left for court, he had handed me a drawing he had made. It showed 2 figures, a A tall woman with silver hair and a small boy, both smiling, standing in front of a house with the words, "Grandma and Michael's home," written in careful 8-year-old handwriting. "This is for good luck, Grandma," he had said solemnly. Now, sitting in the front row of the courtroom with Patricia beside me, I held that drawing in my hands as Rebecca was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit that seemed to diminish her even further. She looked at me once across the courtroom, and for a moment I saw a flash of the little girl who used to climb into my lap when she had nightmares. But then her expression hardened, and I saw only the woman who had stolen from her own son and tried to convince him that his grandmother didn't love him. District Attorney Morrison stood to present the prosecution's case. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about the systematic betrayal of trust by a daughter who chose greed over family, theft over love, and deception over honesty." She outlined the evidence methodically. The surveillance footage of Rebecca celebrating the theft, the bank records showing the systematic drainage of Michael's education fund, the forged medical documents Richard had prepared to have me declared incompetent, and the emotional abuse inflicted on an 8-year-old child. But the most damaging evidence came from Rebecca herself. The prosecution played the audio recording from the restaurant, where Rebecca had laughed about manipulating her confused old mother and bragged about how easy it had been to steal the education fund. When Rebecca's own voice filled the courtroom saying, "She actually believed that confused old woman act," I saw several jurors look at her with disgust. Rebecca's attorney attempted a defense based on spousal manipulation, claiming that Richard had controlled and coerced her into participating in his schemes. But the surveillance evidence showed Rebecca as an active, enthusiastic participant who had come up with many of the lies used to isolate me from Michael. On the second day of the trial, I was called to testify. Walking to the witness stand, I felt the weight of every corporate boardroom I had ever entered, every fraud case I had ever investigated, every time I had stood up to powerful people who thought they could intimidate me into silence. "Mrs. Kensington," D.A. Morrison began, "can you describe your relationship with your daughter before you discovered her crimes?" "I loved Rebecca completely," I said simply. "I had sacrificed my retirement, sold my business, and moved closer to her family so I could help with Michael's upbringing. I thought we were close. When did you first suspect something was wrong?" "When Rebecca told me I was embarrassing the family and shouldn't come to Michael's school events anymore. The same week, the school principal called about irregularities in Michael's education fund." I testified for 3 hours, walking the jury through the discovery of the theft, the investigation that revealed Richard's criminal network, and the emotional manipulation that had convinced Michael his grandmother no longer loved him. When Rebecca's attorney cross-examined me, he tried to paint me as a controlling matriarch who had used financial manipulation to dominate my family. "Mrs. Kensington," he said, "isn't it true that you've always used your wealth to control your daughter's choices?" "No," I replied calmly. "I used my wealth to support my daughter's choices. When she needed help with her divorce, I helped. When she wanted to buy a house, I helped. When she asked me to establish an education fund for Michael, I established it. But you disapproved of her marriage to Richard Williams." I had no opinion about her marriage to Richard Williams until I discovered he was stealing from my grandson's education fund and planning to have me committed to a memory care facility. "Mrs. Kensington, isn't this entire prosecution your way of punishing your daughter for choosing her husband over you?" I looked directly at Rebecca as I answered. "This prosecution is my way of protecting my grandson from people who stole his future and convinced him he was unloved." The most powerful testimony came from Michael himself. The judge had arranged for him to testify via closed-circuit television from a child-friendly room, with a child psychologist present. When the prosecutor asked Michael to describe how he felt when his mother told him I didn't want to see him anymore, his small voice filled the courtroom. I thought I had done something really bad to make Grandma Sophia not love me anymore. I kept asking Mom what I did wrong, but she just said that old people sometimes get confused and forget how to love children. The jury watched an 8-year-old boy explain how he had blamed himself for his grandmother's absence, how he had cried himself to sleep, wondering what he had done to lose my love. When the defense attorney asked Michael if he was angry with his mother, his answer was heartbreaking in its innocence. "I'm sad that Mom took my school money. And I'm sad that she lied about Grandma Sophia. But I still love her because she's my mom." After Michael's testimony, Rebecca was crying for the first time since her arrest. But it was too late for tears. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. We, the jury, find the defendant Rebecca Williams guilty on all counts: elder financial abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, theft from a minor's educational fund, and conspiracy to file false mental competency proceedings. As the verdict was read, Rebecca collapsed into her chair. Her attorney put his arm around her shoulders, but she pushed him away and looked directly at me. For a moment, I thought she might finally apologize, might finally show remorse for what she had done to Michael and to me. Instead, she mouthed words that chilled me. "This is your fault." Even after being convicted of stealing from her own son, even after hearing Michael's heartbroken testimony, Rebecca still believed that I was the villain in this story. Judge Williams scheduled sentencing for the following week, but she addressed Rebecca directly before adjourning. "Ms. Williams, in 30 years on this bench, I have rarely seen a case that involved such a complete betrayal of family trust. You didn't just steal money. You stole your son's sense of security and your mother's peace of mind. Most unforgivably, you convinced an innocent child that he was unloved." As the bailiffs led Rebecca away, she turned one final time to look at me. The hatred in her eyes was unmistakable. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something approaching peace. Justice had been served, and Michael would never again have to wonder whether his grandmother loved him. The sentencing hearing took place on a gray November morning that matched the somber mood in the courthouse. I sat in the same front row seat I had occupied throughout the trial, but this time Michael was beside me. At his request, he wanted to be present when his mother learned her fate. "I need to see what happens," he had told me the night before. "She's still my mom, even though she did bad things." The wisdom of that 8-year-old boy continued to astound me. Judge Williams entered the courtroom with the gravity befitting someone about to impose consequences that would reshape multiple lives. Rebecca stood at the defendant's table, flanked by her attorneys, looking smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen her. "Before I impose sentence," Judge Williams began, "I want to address the impact of these crimes on the victims." She gestured to me. "Mrs. Kensington, would you like to make a victim impact statement?" I stood slowly, feeling the weight of everything that had brought us to this moment. As I walked to the podium, I caught Rebecca's eye. For just an instant, I saw a flicker of the daughter I had raised, the little girl who used to tell me she wanted to be just like me when she grew up. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. "Rebecca's crimes didn't just steal money. They stole something much more precious. They stole a child's sense of security and a grandmother's relationship with her grandson." I looked directly at Rebecca as I continued. "For months, my grandson Michael believed that his grandmother had stopped loving him. He blamed himself for my absence from his life. He worried that he had done something terrible to make me abandon him." Rebecca's composure finally cracked. Tears streamed down her face as she listened to the impact of her choices. "But Michael wasn't the only victim," I continued. "Rebecca and her husband Richard planned to have me declared mentally incompetent and committed to a memory care facility. They were prepared to steal my freedom, my dignity, and ultimately my life, just as they had done to other elderly women." I paused, gathering strength for what I needed to say next. "Your Honor, I have spent my entire career fighting fraud and protecting vulnerable people from those who would exploit them. I never imagined that the person I would need protection from would be my own daughter." I turned to face Rebecca directly. "Rebecca, I loved you completely. I sacrificed my retirement to help you rebuild your life after your divorce. I sold my business to ensure you and Michael would never lack for anything, and you repaid that love by stealing from your own son and trying to convince him that his grandmother was too confused and embarrassed to love him anymore." Rebecca was sobbing now, but I wasn't finished. "The saddest part is that you could have simply asked me for help. If you were struggling financially, if Richard needed money for his businesses, you could have come to me. Instead, you chose deception, theft, and emotional cruelty." I looked back at Judge Williams. "Your Honor, I ask that you impose a sentence that reflects not just the financial crimes, but the emotional devastation inflicted on an innocent child who deserved better from his mother." As I returned to my seat, Michael reached for my hand. "That was good, Grandma," he whispered. Judge Williams then addressed Rebecca directly. Ms. Williams, do you have anything to say before I impose sentence? Rebecca stood unsteadily, wiping tears from her face. For a moment, I hoped she might finally apologize, might finally acknowledge the full scope of what she had done. Your Honor, she began, her voice barely audible. I know I made mistakes. I know I hurt people who loved me. She turned to look at Michael and me. Mom, Michael, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. It was the first genuine remorse she had shown since her arrest. I don't know how I became someone who could steal from her own son, she continued. I don't know how I became someone who could lie about her mother's mental condition. I just know that I lost my way, and by the time I realized how far I had fallen, it seemed too late to stop. She looked directly at me. Mom, you were the best mother anyone could ask for. You taught me to be strong, to be honest, to protect the people I love. I failed at all of those things, and I have no excuse. Judge Williams listened impassively, then reviewed her sentencing notes. Rebecca Williams, you have been convicted of multiple felonies involving the systematic abuse of elderly and minor victims. The evidence shows that you actively participated in a criminal conspiracy that stole over $400,000 from your own son's education fund. She paused, letting the weight of those words settle. More significantly, you engaged in emotional abuse of a minor child by convincing him that his grandmother no longer loved him. You participated in a plan to have your mother forcibly committed to a memory care facility based on false medical evidence. These crimes strike at the heart of family trust and societal protection of our most vulnerable citizens. Judge Williams looked directly at Rebecca. Taking into account your lack of prior criminal history and your expression of remorse, I sentence you to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. Rebecca's knees buckled. 8 years. Michael would be 16 when his mother was released from prison. Furthermore, Judge Williams continued, I am terminating your parental rights and granting full legal custody of Michael to his grandmother, Sophia Kensington. The courtroom was silent except for Rebecca's quiet sobbing. Finally, Judge Williams said, you are ordered to pay full restitution of $420,000 to Michael's education fund, plus interest and penalties totaling $600,000. As the bailiffs approached to escort Rebecca back to prison, she turned one final time toward Michael and me. Michael, she called out, I love you. Please don't forget that I love you. Michael stood up in his seat. I love you too, Mom, he said simply. And then she was gone. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Michael and I were surrounded by reporters and well-wishers, but all I could focus on was my grandson's face. Are you okay? I asked him. I'm sad for Mom, he said honestly, but I'm happy that I get to stay with you. Patricia approached us with a smile. Sophia, there's something else you should know. The federal government is seizing all of Richard's assets from his criminal enterprise. That money will be distributed to his victims' families. You're looking at receiving approximately $2 million in recovered funds. $2 million. Combined with the education fund restitution, Michael's financial future was more secure than it had ever been. But more importantly, his emotional future was secure too. That evening, as we sat at our kitchen table working on Michael's homework, he looked up at me with those serious eyes. Grandma, when I grow up, I want to help people like you help those other grandmothers who got hurt by bad people. What do you mean? I want to be a lawyer who protects families from people who try to steal from them. I smiled at my grandson, this remarkable little boy who had survived his mother's betrayal and emerged with his heart intact and his moral compass pointing true north. I think you'll be an excellent lawyer, Michael. Will you teach me? Every day, I promised. As I tucked him into bed that night, Michael asked the question I had been dreading. Grandma, do you think Mom will ever be able to live with us again? I chose my words carefully. Michael, your mother made choices that hurt you and hurt me. She's going to prison for a long time to face the consequences of those choices. Whether she can ever be part of our family again will depend on whether she truly changes and whether she can earn back the trust she destroyed. Do you think she can change? I hope so, sweetheart. For her sake and for yours, I hope so. But as I turned off his light, I realized that it no longer mattered whether Rebecca changed or not. Michael and I had already built something new. something stronger than what Rebecca had tried to destroy. We had built a family based on truth, trust, and unconditional love, and nothing would ever threaten that again. 2 years have passed since that November morning when Rebecca was sentenced to prison. As I write this final chapter, I'm sitting in the garden of the new house Michael and I bought together. A beautiful colonial with enough room for his friends to visit and a large kitchen where we bake cookies every Sunday. Michael is now 10 years old, thriving in his new school where he's student council president and captain of the chess team. The boy who once believed his grandmother had abandoned him now radiates the confidence of a child who knows he is unconditionally loved. The ripple effects of our case extended far beyond our family. Richard Williams was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. His criminal network was completely dismantled, with 11 other conspirators facing prison sentences. The investigation led to new federal legislation protecting elderly Americans from financial abuse, legislation that reporters have dubbed the Sophia Kensington Act. More importantly, the money recovered from Richard's criminal enterprise funded a new foundation I established, the Michael Kensington Foundation for Elder Protection and Family Justice. We've already helped 47 families recover stolen assets and expose 12 additional fraud schemes targeting elderly Americans. Helen Chen was released from the memory care facility where Richard had imprisoned her. Her cognitive abilities, it turned out, were perfectly intact. She had been systematically drugged to appear confused. She now serves on our foundation's board of directors and has become one of my closest friends. The education fund that Rebecca and Richard stole has been restored and expanded. Michael's college and graduate school expenses are fully covered, with enough remaining to fund scholarships for other children whose educational futures were threatened by family financial abuse. But the most significant change has been in Michael himself. Last month, he asked if he could write a letter to his mother in prison. I had been dreading this conversation for 2 years, unsure how to navigate his complex feelings about Rebecca's betrayal and his natural love for his mother. "Grandma," he said as we sat in our kitchen one evening, "I've been thinking about Mom a lot lately. What have you been thinking? I'm not angry with her anymore. I understand that she made really bad choices that hurt us, but I also understand that people can change if they really want to. The wisdom of this 10-year-old boy never ceases to amaze me. Do you want to have a relationship with your mother again? Maybe someday," he said thoughtfully, "but not until she proves she's really changed, and not until she understands how much she hurt you." Michael's letter to Rebecca was remarkable in its maturity. "Dear Mom, I hope you are doing well in prison. Grandma Sophia and I are doing great. I'm getting good grades and I made the chess team. I want you to know that I forgive you for taking my school money and for lying about Grandma. But I also want you to know that what you did was really wrong and it hurt both of us a lot. Grandma Sophia loves me every day and takes good care of me. She taught me that families should be honest with each other and should protect each other, not hurt each other. If you want to be part of our family again someday, you need to understand that Grandma Sophia is the most important person in my life, and you can never try to hurt her again. I love you because you're my mom, but I love Grandma Sophia because she's my hero. Love, Michael." Rebecca's response came 2 weeks later. It was the first communication I had received from her since her sentencing. "Mom," her letter began. Michael's letter made me realize how completely I failed as both a daughter and a mother. I have spent the past 2 years in prison thinking about what I did to you and to him, and I am horrified by the person I became. I know that saying I'm sorry isn't enough. I know that asking for forgiveness isn't enough. I destroyed the trust that should exist between a mother and child, between a daughter and her mother. I want you to know that I am getting help here. I'm in therapy, learning about the choices I made and why I made them. I'm taking classes in financial responsibility and ethics. I'm trying to become someone worthy of the love you and Michael showed me for so many years. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect Michael to want a relationship with me. I just want you to know that I finally understand what I lost, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to become worthy of being your daughter again. I love you both, even though I have no right to say that after what I did. Rebecca." As I read her letter, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 2 years, hope that my daughter might finally be finding her way back to the person I raised her to be. But more importantly, I realized that it no longer mattered whether Rebecca changed or not. Michael and I had built something beautiful from the ashes of her betrayal. Yesterday was Michael's 10th birthday. We held the party in our backyard, with all his friends from school and several families from our foundation. As I watched him blow out his candles, surrounded by people who love and support him, I thought about how different this day was from the birthday party Rebecca had excluded me from 3 years ago. "What did you wish for?" I asked him as we cleaned up afterwards. "I wished that all the grandparents and grandchildren who get hurt by bad people find each other and take care of each other, like we do." That night, as I tucked him into bed in the room he had decorated with his chess trophies and the certificates from the Foundation's youth advocacy program, Michael looked up at me with those serious eyes. "Grandma, do you ever wish this whole thing never happened?" I considered his question carefully. "Michael, I wish you never had to experience the pain of believing you were unloved. I wish your mother had never chosen theft over honesty. But I don't wish this whole thing never happened." "Why not?" "Because this experience taught us both how strong we are. It brought us closer together. It showed us that we can survive anything as long as we have each other. And it gave us the opportunity to help other families who are going through the same thing we survived." "So good things came from bad things?" "The best things often do, sweetheart." As I turned off his light, Michael's voice came softly from the darkness. "Grandma?" "Yes? I'm glad you're my hero too. This morning, I received a call from Dr. Harrison at Westfield Academy. The school wants to name their new scholarship program after me, the Sophia Kensington Fund for Educational Excellence and Family Values. "Mrs. Kensington," Dr. Harrison said, "your story has inspired our entire community. You showed us that age is not a limitation, that families can heal from betrayal, and that standing up for what's right is always worth the fight. Next month, I'm giving the keynote address at the National Conference on Elder Protection. My speech is titled, 'When Victims Become Victors, Fighting Back Against Family Financial Abuse.' But tonight, I'm just Grandma Sophia, sitting in my garden while Michael practices chess moves at the outdoor table we set up under the oak tree. He's preparing for the state championship tournament next month, and he's been analyzing grandmaster games with the intensity of someone 3 times his age. 'Grandma,' he calls out, 'come look at this move. I think I found a way to win in 12 moves.' As I walk over to examine his chess position, I reflect on how completely our lives have changed. 3 years ago, I was a lonely widow being systematically isolated by my own daughter, convinced that I was becoming an embarrassment to my family. Today, I am Michael's legal guardian, the founder of a successful advocacy foundation, and a nationally recognized expert on elder protection. More importantly, I am the grandmother of a remarkable young man who will never again doubt that he is loved. Rebecca stole our money, our trust, and our peace of mind. But she couldn't steal our love for each other. And in the end, that love was stronger than all her lies, more powerful than all her manipulation, and more enduring than all her betrayal. "Grandma," Michael says, grinning as he shows me his chess solution, "I think we're going to win this one." "We already have, sweetheart," I tell him. "We already have."